The moon above the ruined city burned red, casting strange shadows across the broken buildings and shattered roads. Fires flickered in the distance, but the streets were quiet, too quiet. The silence made the soldier's skin crawl, but he kept moving forward with his weapon raised and breath steady. He had survived worse than this before. Sergeant Leo Grant didn't believe in omens, but the night felt wrong. His squad was gone. Communications were dead. The mission had turned into a ghost operation. And now he was alone. Orders were simple: secure the alien tech before it fell into enemy hands. But when he entered the last marked zone, he didn't expect her. She dropped from the sky like a demon made of flame and shadow. Her armor shimmered like liquid metal, black and red with glowing streaks running across her limbs. Her face was sharp, beautiful, inhuman. Her eyes glowed like burning coals. In her hand, she held a curved plasma blade that hummed with lethal heat. She didn't speak. She attacked. Leo barely deflected her first strike. Her blade sang against his armor, leaving scorched lines along his chest plate. He rolled, ducked, and countered, but she was faster, stronger, more trained. Every move she made was silent and deadly, like a shadow given life. She wasn't just a soldier. She was an assassin. He had faced aliens before, but nothing like her. Every time he struck, she dodged. Every time she attacked, he barely survived. She wasn't trying to capture him. She was trying to end him, fast, clean, without mercy. But then, something strange happened. She hesitated. For one brief second, she paused with her blade near his throat. Their eyes met. He saw confusion in hers. Her fingers trembled. That was his opening. He didn't kill her. He flipped her down, pinned her, and disarmed her in one smooth motion. She didn't resist. She looked up at him and whispered one word, "Please." He froze. The assassin the killer sent to end him was begging. Her voice was soft, but her face still burned with pride. She wasn't crying. She wasn't scared. But something deep in her had cracked, and what she said next made him feel like the whole world had tilted. "I'm worth more alive." She knelt there, surrounded by the glowing red of her blade on the wet pavement. Her breath was ragged, but she didn't try to run. In the distance, he could hear footsteps. More of her kind. He knew what they were, retrieval squad. But they weren't coming to save her. They were coming to finish the job. Leo looked at her again. She didn't move. She just stared at him, like she was daring him to make a choice. Kill her, and everything would return to protocol. Capture her, and Command would ask questions he didn't want to answer. But something inside him shifted. She had been sent to kill him, and she had failed. In her world, that meant one thing: execution. Her people didn't allow failure. Not for elite assassins. And if she wasn't dead by his hand, she'd be taken and punished far worse. She knew it. He knew it. And yet she stayed kneeling, not fighting, not running, waiting. Leo sighed. His hand tightened on his weapon, then slowly loosened. He grabbed her arm and pulled her up. She didn't fight back. For a second, her glowing eyes widened. Shock, then confusion, then something else, something he couldn't name. "We move," he said. Behind them, shadows closed in. He could hear boots splashing in the water, plasma rifles charging. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and now he was protecting a hostile, a deadly alien, a woman who had nearly killed him, and he had just made her his responsibility. She ran beside him, silent and smooth. Every step was graceful. She didn't ask where they were going. She just followed. The moment she didn't kill him, her life had changed. And now, because he spared her, his had changed too. The rooftops above them flashed with red lights as alien scouts searched for movement. Leo ducked under a fallen metal beam, pulling the alien girl with him. Her movements were smooth, silent, like she had trained her whole life to survive in places like this. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She followed every motion, her steps perfectly in sync with his pace. Rain started to fall, light at first, then heavy, turning the broken streets into rivers of red and black. Her skin glistened under the street lamps, her armor slick with moisture. Leo could feel his heart pounding in his chest, not from fear, but from something else he couldn't name. She had tried to kill him, and now she was his shadow, They reached an old loading dock behind a shattered factory wall. He kicked the rusted door open and led her inside. The room was cold and dark, filled with broken crates and scattered machine parts. He took a breath and turned to face her. She was standing still, watching him with those glowing eyes that never seemed to blink. "Why didn't you finish the job?" he asked quietly. His voice didn't carry judgment, only confusion. She tilted her head, then looked away. There was a pause, heavy and sharp like a blade in the air. When she spoke, her voice was calm and controlled. "I don't know." He didn't believe her. No assassin was trained without purpose. No elite killer hesitated unless something deep inside cracked. He watched her closely. She wasn't lying. She was lost, and for someone like her, being lost was worse than death. He dropped his gear on the floor and checked his comm device. Still dead. No signal. They were cut off. She walked to the far corner of the room and sat against the wall. She didn't ask for food or water. She didn't demand answers. She just sat there, eyes open, hands resting on her knees. Leo sat across from her, keeping his rifle between them. Trust didn't exist between them. Not yet. But something else had started. "I was born to kill," she said suddenly. "I was raised to be perfect. No mistakes. No questions. You were my target. I trained for weeks to learn your movements, your habits, your flaws. I knew your voice before I even heard it in person. And still, I failed." Her words hit him harder than any weapon. She spoke like a machine, but there was a crack in her tone, a ripple in her armor. She wasn't just explaining, she was confessing. She had been built to destroy him, and now she was trying to understand why she couldn't. He didn't answer. He couldn't, because part of him didn't understand either. Outside, footsteps echoed again. Leo moved fast, peeking through the broken glass. Two patrols were searching the alley, slow and methodical. He leaned back and motioned for silence. She didn't move, didn't breathe loud, didn't even flinch. Her discipline was terrifying. They waited in the dark until the searchers passed. Then Leo moved to block the entrance with an old metal panel. He looked at her again. She was staring at him like he was the one under question. Her next words froze the air around him. "I failed my mission. You didn't kill me. That means the claim falls to you." He narrowed his eyes. "Claim," she nodded slowly. "If I fail and live, I become the property of the one I failed to kill. It's part of the code. Either I die or I submit." Leo stood still. The words felt heavy, ancient, like they came from a world older than rules or reason. He wanted to argue, to reject it, to say it made no sense, but her face told him she believed it. Every word. She was not lying. "What happens if I don't claim you? Then they will, and I will suffer until death." Silence stretched between them again. He could feel the weight of her oath pressing into the room like gravity. This wasn't about pride or tradition. This was about survival. Her people would not forgive her. But she wasn't begging. She wasn't asking for protection. She was offering herself like a warrior without armor. Leo stared at her for a long time, then sat down and said only one word: rest. She closed her eyes, her breathing steady and quiet. By the time morning broke through the smoky sky, the factory had grown colder. Light poured through cracks in the ceiling, landing on scattered debris and dust. Leo stood quietly at the doorway, watching the street outside. The girl was still, asleep in the corner, curled up like a soldier who didn't expect peace, but took what rest she could find. Her name was still unknown to him. She hadn't offered it, and he hadn't asked. Names carried weight. They built connection. Leo wasn't sure if he wanted that yet. All he knew was that she hadn't tried to escape. She hadn't picked up a weapon. She had followed him without question. He opened a ration pack and placed it between them. The smell of synthetic meat and nutrient paste filled the air. She stirred slightly, her glowing red eyes blinking open. She looked at the food, then at him. He nodded toward it. She picked it up without a word and ate slowly, her movements precise and graceful. They sat in silence. Leo listened to the distant sounds of patrols, mechanical drones, and city broadcasts. The war was still raging outside, but here time felt frozen. She was supposed to be his enemy. She had almost killed him. Now she was eating from his hand like a lost soldier. After finishing, She wiped her hands on her thigh armor and finally spoke. "My name is Virel." Her voice was softer than before, no longer sharp like a blade. Leo nodded slightly. He still didn't give his own name, not yet. She didn't ask for it either. She simply looked up and added something that twisted his gut. "I have no home to return to." Leo didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and checked his rifle. The battery was at 60%. He scavenged a spare power cell from his kit and reloaded. Across the room, Virel stood and stretched her limbs, the soft hum of her bodysuit pulsing as the energy adjusted to movement. He looked at her carefully. Her body was built for speed, strength, and precision. Her eyes held no fear, but there was something else now, a small flicker of uncertainty, as if something inside her had started to change, and she didn't know whether to fight it or follow. "We move soon," Leo said. She didn't respond, but her nod was quick, no hesitation. They both knew staying here too long was dangerous. The factory was exposed. Patrols had nearly caught them once. Next time, there wouldn't be a warning. Leo slung his rifle over his shoulder and gestured to the broken back door. They moved through narrow alleys, stepping over broken machines and burned-out vehicles. The city had once been alive with lights and voices. Now it was a graveyard of steel and ash. Virel's boots made no sound on the wet ground. She moved like smoke, like shadow. He kept glancing back at her without meaning to. At one point, they passed a wall painted with old human symbols. A faded poster showed soldiers smiling with children beneath a blue sky. Virel paused and stared at it for a moment. Her face remained unreadable, but something in her stance had changed. Leo didn't say anything. He just waited until she stepped forward again. They finally reached a safe zone, an old underground tunnel used during evacuations. It was dark, narrow, and smelled of metal and mold, but it was secure. Leo lit a small handheld lamp and motioned her inside. As they sat against the curved tunnel wall, Virel broke the silence. "You should take the claim." Leo looked at her directly. "Why?" "Because I don't want to die." Her words weren't desperate. They were calm, like facts delivered without drama. She wasn't begging. She was stating what was expected. Leo rubbed his temples. "You want to live as someone else's property?" "No, but that's the only way I live at all." The weight of her words settled over them like dust. Leo leaned back against the wall and stared up at the damp ceiling. This wasn't a mission anymore. This wasn't a normal war. Something larger was unfolding, something he hadn't trained for. And yet, here he was, sitting beside the very weapon that had been meant to end him. She closed her eyes and rested her head against the cold wall. The tunnel was cold and quiet, like the air itself had forgotten how to move. Leo sat with his arms resting on his knees, watching Virel from the corner of his eye. She hadn't moved for the last hour. Her breathing was slow, her eyes half closed, but she was still alert underneath it all. He knew this wasn't a trick. If she wanted him dead, he'd be dead already, but that didn't mean he understood her. She had gone from deadly assassin to silent companion in a matter of hours, and her calm acceptance of her fate disturbed him more than her blade ever had. He remembered the first briefing before this mission. The commanders had warned him about the elite units of the Zykeran Empire. Fast, smart, unstoppable, but they hadn't said anything about their rules, their oaths, the part where failure meant belonging to your enemy. He had thought they were just killers. Now here he was, guarding one in the dark, trying to make sense of ancient codes written in blood and loyalty. Virel shifted slightly and opened her eyes again. "You haven't decided yet," she said quietly. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She already knew. She stood up and walked toward him, her steps slow but sure. "If you wait too long, they'll decide for you," she added. Leo looked at her face. Her expression was calm, but her voice carried a warning. Not for her own sake, but for his. That was new. "I didn't ask for this," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "Neither did I." Her reply was honest, sharp, but not angry, just tired. "My kill orders came through a chain of command I cannot question. You were just a name on a screen. Now you're something else." He looked away. Her words were pressing something deep inside him that he didn't want to face. Maybe it was the way she watched him without fear. Or maybe it was how she sat quietly when most enemies would scream and fight. She didn't want control. She wanted meaning. Leo stood and walked to the far end of the tunnel. A collapsed section had blocked the path, but he could still hear faint sounds from the surface above. Distant engines, radio static. The world was moving while they sat in the shadows. He didn't like it. He returned to her and handed her a small headset from his gear pouch. "If you hear movement, say it," he instructed. She took it and clipped it onto her collar without a word. They worked like a unit, even without trust. It was unsettling how easily she adapted. Later that evening, Leo checked his encrypted tracker. There was a signal, weak but present. It was from a nearby extraction point. If they could reach it, they could get off-world. But he didn't know what Command would do if they saw him arrive with her. Probably shoot first and ask later. He didn't share the signal with her. Not yet. But she seemed to sense it anyway. "You found a way out," she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded slowly. She didn't ask to come with him. Instead, she sat down again and said something that made his hands freeze. "If you leave me here, they'll erase me." Leo turned. "Erase you?" "Yes, I will be reprocessed, mind wiped, reprogrammed, my identity removed." He stared at her. She didn't blink. She spoke of it like she was reading a list, as if it had already happened to others she knew. Warriors trained from childhood, turned into ghosts by the very empire they served. His jaw tightened. "You really think I'm your only chance?" "I don't think." "I know." The room fell into silence again, but it wasn't the heavy silence of before. It was full of things unspoken. Regret, fear, maybe even guilt. Leo felt it weighing on both of them. They were from different worlds, different species, different laws, and yet they were tied now by a single moment of mercy. He walked to the edge of the light, gripping his rifle tightly. The next morning arrived without warning. Just a soft glow seeping into the tunnel from cracks above. Leo hadn't slept. His body was still, but his mind raced through 100 paths, and all of them ended in danger. Virel sat nearby, her eyes closed but her body alert. She didn't seem tired at all. Leo finally stood and stretched his arms. His back ached from sleeping against the metal wall, but he ignored it. There was no time to feel pain. They had to move. He walked over to Virel and tapped her shoulder. Her eyes opened immediately, clear and sharp like she had never rested. "There's a supply post 20 blocks from here," he said. "If we reach it, we can access the subnet and call for evac." Virel nodded. No complaints, no questions, just readiness. He appreciated that. In a situation like this, hesitation could get them both killed. They left the tunnel and slipped into the ruined city again. Smoke curled into the sky from distant fires, and occasional plasma bursts echoed in the wind. War hadn't slowed down just because they had paused. It kept moving, destroying whatever stood in its path. They had to keep moving too. They kept to the shadows every time a scout ship passed overhead. They ducked behind rubble or inside broken buildings. Virel moved like she was part of the environment. She didn't make a sound. Leo tried to keep up, but even he had to admit she was better at this when they finally reached the supply post. It was half destroyed. Part of the ceiling had collapsed, and a broken fuel line hissed in the corner. But the console they needed was still there, protected behind reinforced steel and a working power unit. Leo moved fast, setting up the uplink. Virel stood guard at the door, eyes scanning every corner, every sound. She hadn't asked what he planned to do. She just did her part. Leo respected that. When the connection blinked to life, he hesitated. Before entering his ID, the moment he connected, Command would see everything. He uploaded a short signal, nothing too detailed. Just a request for emergency pickup, encrypted and tagged with high-risk priority. As soon as the signal sent, he shut down the console. No voice contact, no data leaks. Just a silent call for help in a city that wanted them dead. Extraction. In 20 hours, he said. Virel didn't react. She stepped back from the doorway and nodded. "We'll be hunted before then." Leo didn't argue. She was right. The Zykeran command net would detect their signal soon. And when they did, they'd send more than just scouts. They moved again, searching for shelter. This time they found An old hospital buried beneath a collapsed skyscraper. Most of the doors were sealed, but Leo used his blade to pry one open. Inside was dust, shattered glass, and faded signs with human symbols. It smelled like forgotten hope. They sat inside what had once been a recovery room. The beds were twisted, the walls cracked. Leo checked his gear while Virel examined the walls. Her fingers traced the symbols carved into the metal, strange alien writing over human words. Messages of war, surrender, and death. This place was one of ours, she said quietly. Before the invasion. Leo looked up. You've been here before. She nodded. Not me, my squad. I read the reports. This was where we first met resistance that didn't run. He said nothing. There was no pride in her voice, just memory, just facts. She was reliving the failure of her kind to control this world. And now she was on the run with the very species her people thought they could dominate. Suddenly, a loud screech pierced the silence. A recon drone zipped past the broken window. Both of them hit the ground instantly. Leo peered through a crack and saw it hover, scanning. After a tense minute, it drifted away. But they both knew more would follow. We're out of time, Leo muttered. They'll find us soon. I know. He looked at her again. She was calm. Her blade rested on her hip, ready if needed. Her eyes met his, and something passed between them. Not fear, not orders. Just a single shared thought. Survive. Asterisk. The screech of another drone echoed across the hospital ruins. Leo didn't wait this time. He grabbed his gear and signaled Virel. With a short nod, she responded instantly, following him through a side hallway lined with broken beds and scattered medical supplies. Their boots crunched softly over debris. They moved quickly through the shadows. The hallway twisted, opening into a larger surgical room that had once held life-saving machines. Now it was nothing but cracked tiles, bloodstains, and cold silence. Leo stopped at the far door and listened carefully. Footsteps were approaching from above. Stalkers, Virel said. Her tone was low, serious. Leo had heard the name before. Elite Zykeran trackers, silent, deadly, designed to hunt traitors and survivors. They had no mercy and no fear if they were near. They had already picked up a trail. That trail was likely. Leo pressed a hand to the wall and activated a hidden panel. A backup passage slid open, revealing a narrow ventilation crawl space. Without wasting a second, he climbed inside. Virel followed close behind. The door sealed behind them, swallowing the light. Inside, the only sound was their breath. The tunnel was tight, forcing them to crawl on hands and knees. The walls were cold metal, covered in dust and grease. Every movement had to be careful, slow, quiet. One loud scrape, and the stalkers would hear it. Leo moved with practiced ease. Virel moved like she was part of the shadows. After several minutes, they emerged into an abandoned basement level. Storage crates were stacked around them, many half-opened, and filled with old supplies. Leo checked a locker and pulled out a flare gun and a cracked scanner. Virel found a medkit and began checking the contents with skill. They're closer now, she said. I can feel them. Her voice was steady, but Leo could tell she was bracing herself, not for death, but for duty. If they were caught, she would fight, she would kill, and if she failed, she would die without question. That was still her way. Leo looked at the time on his wristband. 14 hours until extraction. Too long. He needed a diversion, something to draw the stalkers away from their path. He opened a crate marked Emergency Defense System and pulled out a pulse mine. It was old, but functional. He handed it to Virel. Set it behind us. 10-minute delay. She nodded and vanished into the shadows like a whisper. Leo took a deep breath and loaded the flare gun. It was a desperate move, but it might be enough. He fired the flare through a broken vent toward the surface. The burst of light and sound exploded outside, painting the sky in red fire. Alarms wailed in the distance. The stalkers would turn toward the noise. Leo ducked behind a crate just as Virel returned. Trap-armed, she said. Her voice was calm again. The pressure seemed to steady her. They waited in silence. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then, a distant boom. The mine detonated. Screams of distorted metal filled the air. It had worked, at least for now. Leo stood and motioned for her to follow. They pushed deeper into the basement tunnels, farther from the heat above. As they walked, Virel spoke without turning. "You still haven't claimed me." Leo looked at her back and stayed silent. She didn't stop. "You know what happens. If you don't, I do too. You need to make the decision." Her words weren't angry, just certain, just truth. Leo stopped walking. "And what happens if I do?" She turned and faced him. Her glowing red eyes held no fear. "Then I follow your orders. I protect you. I live by your rules. And I stop being a weapon." Her voice was soft, but her stance was strong. She was ready to accept it. Leo stepped forward slowly. "Why does that matter to you?" She looked him in the eyes. "Because you didn't kill me when you had the chance. That means something." The silence between them grew heavy again, but it was no longer awkward. It was honest. He didn't speak. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder and nodded once. The underground tunnel opened into a forgotten transit station, buried beneath layers of rubble. And time, old transport rails stretched into the darkness, twisted and rusted, swallowed by the earth. Leo scanned the area with his rifle raised while Virel moved ahead, her boots silent on the cracked floor. The air was thicker here, laced with moisture and the scent of decay. Broken lights flickered along the walls, and old human posters peeled from the surfaces like skin. It was a graveyard of another age, but it offered cover. And that was all they needed now. Leo stopped beside a control panel embedded in the wall. The screen blinked faintly, asking for a command input. He pressed a few buttons, but the interface buzzed with an error. "No power to this sector," he muttered. Virel stepped forward and pried open a service hatch with her blade. Inside were wires wrapped in dust and mold. She examined them, then pulled a power cell from her armor and jammed it into the port. Sparks flew. The screen blinked to life. Leo raised an eyebrow. "That was a field core. You'll need that." She didn't answer. The console lit up and displayed the city map. One of the subroutes was blinking. "That leads to the outer edge," Leo said. "We could reach extraction early." Virel leaned over the display, scanning it quickly. Her hand hovered near the power cell but didn't pull it out. "We'll lose this station if I remove the core," she said. "But we'll need it for the final climb." Leo nodded. Every step now carried risk. Every tool had to be weighed against time. She pulled the cell free, and the console dimmed back into blackness. They followed the blinking line deeper into the tunnels. The walls narrowed, and the path twisted like a serpent beneath the city. Leo kept one hand on his rifle and the other near his belt in case of mines or traps. Virel walked beside him, eyes scanning every surface. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of dripping water and distant echoes kept them company. Then Leo broke the silence. "You were never going to kill me, were you?" Virel didn't stop walking. "I was. That was my only task." But something failed. Leo glanced at her. "Your programming." She shook her head. "My conviction." Her answer came without pause, like she had thought about it 1,000 times already. "I didn't hesitate because I was weak. I hesitated because I saw you choose not to hate." He didn't answer right away. The words hung in the air between them, carried by dust and silence. He knew war had taken more than weapons and walls. It had taken identity. It had blurred the lines between what was right and what was necessary. She was the proof of that. They reached the next platform and ducked behind a pile of fallen support beams. On the far side, Tzykran enforcers patrolled with glowing halberds and thick armor. Leo held up a hand. Virel crouched beside him, her eyes narrowing. "We can't fight them head-on," she said. Leo nodded. He scanned the platform. A power conduit ran along the ceiling, cracked and exposed. "If we shoot the line, we can drop half the ceiling, trap them under it." Virel looked at him. "You shoot. I run ahead and draw them forward." Leo frowned. "Too risky. It's the only way." Before he could argue again, she darted out of cover. The enforcers spotted her and roared in their alien tongue. She flipped over a crate and sprinted to the center of the platform. Leo took the shot. The conduit exploded, sending sparks and metal raining down. The ceiling collapsed onto the enforcers. Just as they reached her, dust filled the air. Virel staggered back through the haze. Coughing but alive, Leo pulled her behind a pillar and checked for wounds. A long burn stretched across her arm, but she waved him off. "I've had worse." Leo helped her up. "Remind me not to argue with you again." She managed a smile. It was small, but it was real. In that moment, she wasn't an assassin. She was a fighter choosing her own war. And Leo knew now she had made her choice long ago. They moved again, side by side in the dark. The final stretch of tunnel opened into a massive ventilation shaft that climbed straight up into darkness. The old access ladder was rusted and unstable, bolted into concrete that had cracked from years of decay. Leo stood at the bottom, staring at the jagged path that would lead them to the surface. Virel stepped beside him, holding the power cell she had retrieved earlier. Her wounded arm was wrapped tightly in fabric torn from her own armor. She didn't complain. She didn't slow down. Her breathing was calm, but her eyes burned with determination. She was ready to finish what they started. "The extraction point is above," Leo said. "We have to climb and signal them from the top." Virel nodded and strapped the power cell to her back. The climb would be long, dangerous, and open. If anyone saw them during the ascent, they wouldn't survive the fall. He went first, gripping each rung carefully. The metal groaned under his weight but held. Virel followed close behind, her movements precise despite her injury. Dust and small pieces of rock rained down as they climbed, but they didn't stop. The light above them grew brighter when they reached halfway. The shaft trembled with a deep vibration. Leo froze. He looked down. A single scout drone hovered in the tunnel below, its searchlight blinking as it scanned upward. They had been spotted. Virel didn't hesitate. She unclipped a small charge from her belt. She dropped the charge with perfect aim. It clinked once against the metal wall, then exploded in a burst of light and sound. The drone shattered into flaming debris. The shockwave rattled the shaft, but the ladder held. Leo pushed upward faster now, his arms burning. At the top, a steel hatch blocked their path. Leo jammed his knife into the seam and forced it open with a grunt. Daylight blinded them for a second as the hatch flew back. Wind howled across the rooftop. Dust whipped across their faces. But the sky was clear, and the extraction signal was strong. Leo rushed to the relay beacon and activated it. A soft pulse of blue light rose into the air. They had made it. Now, all they had to do was wait. But even then, the tension didn't fade. Virel stood with her blade drawn, facing the horizon. Leo could see her shoulders tense. "I don't think they'll let you leave," she said. Her voice was steady, but there was something behind it. Not fear, not regret, acceptance. She knew what was coming. The Empire would not allow her to go free. Not after breaking her code. Not after choosing him. "You have a choice now," Leo said. "You don't belong to anyone. Not anymore." She turned to him, her red eyes shining in the wind. "You claimed me. That changes everything." Leo shook his head. "I didn't claim you. I saved you. There's a difference." Before she could answer, the sky shimmered with the approach of a ship. It was small, fast, and heavily armed. Not human. Not a rescue. Zychern elite forces. Virel stepped in front of Leo, her body tense. "They came for me. Stand down, and you might survive." Leo raised his weapon. Not happening. The ship landed with a hiss, and two armored warriors stepped out. Their armor was gold-trimmed and their helmets marked with command insignias. One of them stepped forward and pointed directly at Virel. "You have one chance. Return. Face judgment." Virel's grip on her blade tightened. Her voice was ice. "No." The second soldier raised his rifle. Leo pulled his trigger first. The blast struck the warrior in the chest, sending him flying. Chaos erupted. Virel launched herself forward, striking with blinding speed. The remaining warrior barely reacted before her blade cut through his armor. The battle ended in seconds. Smoke filled the rooftop. Leo stood over one body while Virel knelt beside the other. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She was still. When she stood, she looked at Leo not as an assassin, but as something else entirely. The human extraction ship arrived moments later. Hovering above the rooftop, a rope ladder dropped, and the bay doors opened. Leo climbed first, reaching out. A hand for her, Virel paused, looking back one last time at the world that had tried to own her. Then she took his hand and climbed.